Good evening and welcome to lesson 3 of Journey of the Soul, the morning after. We took a break last week. Well, welcome back for our third lesson. So good to see you all here, those who are here in person and those who are joining us virtually on Zoom. Thank you all for joining us. So before we begin, we always have to thank our sponsor. So we have our sponsor, Lakeland Metairie Funeral Home and Cemeteries. Thank you so much for your sponsorship for this class and of the entire 6-week course. So like they say in Hebrew, Yasher Koach. Thank you very much. We greatly appreciate the sponsorship. So this is a class which is not really a philosophical class. Many of the classes we give are philosophical, they're abstract. It's a very, very practical discussion. It's a very practical discussion about mourning and about grief. So there's old man Goldberg. And old man Goldberg passes away. And the rabbi is out of town. So they bring a young rabbi from the nearby town to officiate at the funeral. The young rabbi doesn't know old Mr. Goldberg. And so he gets up there and he starts the eulogy and he says, "Oh, Mr. Goldberg, he was such a respected man in the community." And someone pipes up and says, "Are you serious? Mr. Goldberg, he was a ganiv. He was a thief." "Oh, okay. He cared so much about his religion, about his faith, about Judaism." And someone pipes up and says, "Are you serious? He couldn't care less about Judaism. What are you talking about?" "I'm sorry, I meant to say he cared for his family. He was a real family man." "Are you serious? You know what he did to his family?" And he's at a loss, so he says, "So tell me, what can I say about Mr. Goldberg?" So someone says, "His brother was even worse." Okay.
We got one of those.
I'm not going to ask who he or his brother. Okay, so the first 2 lessons of this course, Journey of the Soul, we spoke about just that, the journey of the soul. We explored what is the soul, our true reality, where it comes from, what happens at birth, what happens, how it integrates with the body, what happens after it passes away, where it goes, etc., etc. We spoke about the soul. Tonight, we are going to shift perspectives and look not at the experience of the soul of the person who passes away, but we will talk about the experience of those who are left behind, the loved ones who are left behind, so to say, physically, the spouse, the parents, the children, the friends. Someone passes away in the family, so we know what happens to the soul. We discussed that. Now, what about the people left behind? The grief, the mourning, the pain that they experience. And we are going to discuss this for a moment. How should we deal with our pain and our grief? If you think about it, I think we can all agree that there is nothing as painful as the loss of a loved one. We could lose our house, we could lose our job, we could lose all our money, we could lose something extremely important to us. We could lose our wedding ring, whatever. We could lose a lot. And it's painful. We're sad. We may even cry. But it's not the same as the cry, as the pain, as losing a loved one. But why is that? What is so unique about losing a family member, a close friend? And perhaps what you're thinking is what I'm thinking. And that is that we have this strong emotional bond, emotional connection to people in our lives. And when they pass, it's almost like a part of us has passed. It's a very emotional loss for us. And because of that, because it's an emotional loss, every person reacts differently. everyone processes it differently. No two people and no two experiences are exactly the same. Some rebound quicker than others. A day later, 2 days later, they're after the funeral and they're already back in their office, they're back to their routine, they're functioning properly, seems like they're back to regular. And for some people, a year later, 2 years later, they're still not themselves. They still haven't got back to their as productive as they were before. And there's obviously many people in between. And this is normal. It's okay. Everyone is different. You can't compare people's nature and you can't compare circumstances. Whether it was an old 95-year-old who lived a healthy, beautiful life, or whether it was a 8-year-old who died from cancer, right? Every situation is different and your relationship to that person is different and your nature is different. So there's no two people who react the same, and this is normal. But what is universal is that the pain of losing a loved one is profoundly affects all who are left behind. So what we're going to do tonight, we're going to discuss what is the Jewish perspective on loss, mourning, comfort, and healing. And what we're going to see is that, just like all areas of life, the Torah guides us how we should and how we shouldn't act or react. And the same thing is with mourning. We don't just follow the heart. This is the way I feel. This is what I'm going to do. The Torah mandates there has to be certain types of mourning, not too much, not too little, which we will discuss. And this is the way the Torah guides us of how we are supposed to experience and express our pain, our mourning, our grief after losing a loved one. So we're going to discuss 3 ideas tonight. Why do we mourn? We'll briefly discuss that. Why do we mourn according to the Torah? How do we mourn? And how do we find comfort? And how do we comfort others? Okay? So I understand that this is a sensitive topic for many of us. It's very real for us, for many of us. Many of us have, so to say, open wounds where perhaps recently we have lost a loved one. So please bear with me. Join in the conversation. If you have any questions or if you'd like to have discussions, please, I'd love to hear from you. And obviously after class, we have all the time in the world to continue the conversation. So let's briefly talk about the idea of why do we mourn? Now, seemingly, why? Why is that even a question? Why do we mourn? Is that insensitive? Of course we mourn because someone passed away. That's why we're sad. That's why we're mourning. But the truth is, that in ancient Greek philosophers like Socrates and others, they actually sanctioned death. They said a true man, a true philosopher should not be afraid of death. Right? We know the story of Socrates himself when he was in prison. He could have bribed the prison guard. He could have saved himself. He says, I'm a real man. I'm a philosopher. I'm not afraid of death. I know that the soul is eternal. So we're not sad when someone dies. Judaism also believes in the eternity of the soul. We also believe that death isn't the end. The soul lives on. On the contrary, the soul is closer to God in a way, etc., etc. So why do we mourn? And the Torah makes it very clear that there is a mitzvah, a commandment to mourn. I'm going to skip all the way to text number 4 on page 88. And text number 4, this is from Maimonides. Maimonides teaches us clearly a biblical commandment. This is page 88, text 4, we are biblically commanded to mourn the death of the next of kin. It's right there. No two ways about it. It is a mitzvah to mourn. Why do we mourn? So I'll give you 3 brief reasons before we get to the how. And it's interesting the way the Torah sees human nature. So we have Nachmanides and we have Maimonides. Nachmanides says it's very simple. He says it's human nature to cry. when we are separated from a loved one. Even if the loved one it remains alive, right? If you know that your child is traveling to Australia, traveling to New Zealand for 50 years, 60 years, you may never see them again in your life. There's no Zoom, there's no email, there's no Facebook, there's no Instagram, there's nothing, right? The last time you're going to have any physical correspondence with this child is right now, right? For the next 50 years. I'm assuming you're going to be emotional, and I'm assuming, give me a second, I'm trying to just make sure the internet doesn't go off on me. Okay, sorry about that. So if you have a child leaving town, right, you're emotional, you cry. The same is true when someone passes away. Yes, we just moved to a new reality, but it's painful. Nachmanides says in text 5a, the Torah does not forbid us to weep in response to a death because it is human nature to be moved to tears when separating from loved ones and at their journeying away, even if they are alive. So it's human nature, so it's sanctioned. No reason to fight against our nature. We feel pain, that's fine. And on the contrary, you should mourn. You should cry. Maimonides takes this a step further. Maimonides says in text 5b, mourners find comfort in crying, and it arouses their sorrow. Oh, he takes this a step further. We all know, we perhaps experience this, that sometimes it's cathartic. It feels good. It's healing when we're able to express our pain and we cry. Sometimes after we cry, we say, oh, I feel a little better now. What happened? I cried. And therefore what? The pain is not sitting inside of me anymore. I was able to release it. I cried. So Maimonides says it's not only about human nature, we want to cry, but it's even more so. It's healing. There's a benefit. There's a benefit to crying. So that's reason number 2. And the reason number 3 is obviously what we spoke in previous lessons, that although the soul lives on and it's eternal, it's just moving to a new reality, it's above death, etc., etc. But we also spoke about that ultimately what the soul can accomplish here on earth, living in a body and serving God this way, is something that we cannot accomplish up in heaven. So it's more pleasurable, as we said, up there, but it's more important and meaningful down here. It's more impactful. The impact that the neshama, the soul, has while it's here is greater than anything you could accomplish up there. So for that, we are mourning. For that, we realize, you know what, this type of life, this meaningful life comes to an end, and therefore it is a time to cry. So these are the 3 reasons why we mourn in Judaism. First of all, it's human nature, and the Torah sanctions that. Secondly, it is healing to cry, and therefore it should be done. And thirdly, because we recognize that a very important phase in life has just ended, and for that we are sad, and for that we cry. Now, just a practical note regarding the obligation to mourn, and that is that the biblical obligation, this is what Maimonides tells us, that there is a biblical obligation to mourn. Obviously, we mourn whoever it is, our friends, our family, but the obligation refers to the immediate relatives. I like to call it first degree relatives. And you can see this on page 92. We're talking about parents, siblings, spouse, children, right? So my mother, my father, my husband, my wife, my brother, my sister, my son, and my daughter. These are the people I mourn for, biblically, meaning halachically, according to Jewish law. My grandmother passed away, of course I'm sad. I may join in the Shiva, I may join in the mourning. But the halachic, the Jewish law, does not require me to follow these exact steps of mourning. Only for the immediate relatives. Okay. Question? Okay, so let's move on to how do we mourn? Okay, so we spoke about the why. Now let's talk about the how. So it's clear that unlike the ancient Greek philosophers, Judaism teaches the profound loss of death and the necessity to mourn that loss. But how do we mourn? So Jewish tradition guides us through our mourning process with specific mourning observances. And they can be profoundly helpful and beneficial when we experience the pain of loss. There's like an exact guide. We don't just say, oh, you're feeling pain, just kind of stay low or whatever, grieve at home. The Torah tells us exactly how it should be done. It's a fascinating guide to the mourning process. So if you look at figure 3.2, and I'm going to try seeing if I can share this on the screen. I think most of you right now have your textbooks. If you do not, please reach out to me during the week, and I'll be able to bring one to you. So if you see it over here, if I'm able to get it big enough, I'm not great at this. Okay, so there's 4 or 5 different stages to our mourning. Okay, so the first period is what we call aninut. Aninut is from the moment of passing until the interment. So until the burial, from passing, that is this period of aninut. This is the most intense stage of mourning. I'm reading here from inside. This is the most intense phase of mourning. At this point, no attempt is even made to comfort or console the mourners. During this period, the next of kin are absolved from all positive mitzvot. Nothing should detract or distract from the mourner's pain and their full attention to interment arrangements. Sometime during this aninut stage, the mourners tear their outer garment as sign of mourning. We will speak about the tearing of the garment momentarily. This is a time we don't even try to comfort. It's a time focused on the pain, focus on the loved one, focus on the arrangements of the burial. How long is this stage? Well, it's up to you, it's up to the funeral home. But ideally in Jewish law, we try to do this as quick as possible. What does as quick as possible mean? Well, as possible, that's the answer. Whether it's the same day, that's even better. If it's the next day, it should be the next day. If it's in 2 days, it should be 2 days. But we don't wait a week. We don't wait, until all the arrangements are made. We try to do it as soon as possible. A day or 2, 3 days, if someone has to fly in, so maybe you wait a few hours, you wait a day or 2, but not more than that. As soon as we're able to make the arrangements. And the funeral homes know this already. Oh, it's a Jewish funeral. Okay, we know that's their rush job. We got to expedite this, right? They know this because we don't wait, we don't take our time. We expedite it. It's considered, I think we spoke about this in the past, we consider it out of respect for the deceased that he or she should reach its burial as soon as possible. It's also good for the souls, for the peace of the soul, etc., etc. But this stage on aninut is from the moment of passing until the burial. That's this stage. And then we have the next stage. And that is the stage of Shiva. Shiva is a 7-day mourning period commencing with interment. The Shiva, the word Shiva means, what does it mean? 7. It means 7. Today we have, I'm not doing a 7, I'm doing a 3-day Shiva. You do a 3-day Shiva, but don't call it Shiva, because Shiva means 7, right? Shiva means 7. It's a 7-day period. And we'll talk about the Shiva, what to do or what not to do out of Shiva later on. So we're not going to go into the details because there's a lot to talk about the Shiva, the 7-day. But the idea is the pain is still intense, but it's not as intense. We kind of slowly, gradually climbing out of the intense state of mourning. Then we have a Shloshim, a 30-day mourning period, where we kind of leave Shiva and we have less restrictions. There's a 12-month period, and then there is the Yartzeit, which is the yearly anniversary of the day of passing, where we do observe some level of mourning of certain things that we say, the Kaddish, and some other things that we don't do on the Yartzeit, on the yearly anniversary of the day of passing. So this is the overall, it's like a general overview of this of this tradition, of this the process of the Jewish mourning observances. Now, when we look at this, there are some powerful themes that emerge when we examine these Jewish observances. Now, we don't know the reasons why we have certain mitzvot, right? The Torah tells us we should do A, B, and C, so we do A, B, and C. However, there's also many times, if you think about it, there's a lot of psychological and emotional benefits to mitzvahs as well. And when it comes to Shiva and the whole mourning process, there are definitely benefits which are true and real to this process. So, I'll give you one example. If you look at page 3.3, now I'm not a professional mental health counselor, but there's this idea in psychology where there is two different track models of bereavement, whether we're focusing on the function, the person's functionality, or whether we're focusing on the relationship to the deceased. And it's kind of either or. Either we're focusing on our relationship, or we are focusing on how to function after losing a loved one. The Jewish process of mourning is almost like a two-track model of bereavement. On the one hand, we focus heavily, there's a strong emphasis on our relation with the deceased. We don't want to be in denial. We say, yes, feel the pain, feel connected, feel the relationship, feel saddened by this separation, this physical separation. It's okay and it's mandated. It's necessary. At the same time, we also focus on the function of the person, how the person has to get out of it, how the person has to, work on themselves to get back to functioning, to being productive, to being responsible, to getting back into life. It's both simultaneously. This is perhaps some of the psychology of the bereavement based on the Jewish thought. So let's talk about some of the customs that we have, and perhaps some of the benefits and the significance of it. We mentioned earlier that the first stage is the most intense stage of mourning, and this is what we call aninut. And during this time, we are focusing on our loved one. And we mentioned that there's a custom that we tear our garments. In Hebrew, it's called kiriyah, to tear. We take our garment, we take our shirt, we take our blouse. We're supposed to do it right by our chest, and we maybe take a scissor to get it started, and we tear it. This is traditionally done anytime between the passing and the burial. Usually it's done right before the funeral. Right before the funeral, the rabbi would usually gather the mourners and say, here, we're doing, Kriya. We say a blessing and we tear our garments. I think it's a special and a meaningful moment that the mourners have. The source of this is no other than directly in the Bible. Who do we have in the Bible? Someone who tears their garment when they hear of someone passing away. It goes all the way back to Jacob. I want to read the second half of text 6. And this is when Jacob hears the news, when he thought that Joseph, his son, was killed. So Jacob recognized it and exclaimed, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has been torn to pieces." What does Jacob do? Jacob rent his garments, placed sackcloth on his loins, and mourns his son for many days. What does he do? What's the first action that he does? He tears his garments. Why do we tear our garments? We want to destroy a garment. We're mad at our garments. Why are we tearing our garments? When we tear our garments, it allows us to fully accept the loss. Very, very often, we may feel numb. We are too numb to feel. We don't want to cry. We feel like, I'm good, I'm fine, it's okay. Now, sometimes you get into a car accident, and right away, everyone comes running over. Hey, how are you feeling? How are you feeling? Is everything all right? The police come over. How are you feeling? Do you feel hurt anywhere? No, I'm fine. I'm okay. I'm telling you, I'm fine. I'm okay, right? Did that ever happen to you? I'm fine. And then an hour later, 2 hours later, you're home, you're sitting on the couch, and suddenly, my neck is really hurting me. I'm not sure about my back. I can't really stand. I can't sit. My back is hurting. I'm not sure what it is. Suddenly it's hurting me, right? Oh, it's whiplash. It's something that happened that then, in the shock and the excitement of everything, you don't feel it, and you really don't feel it. But it emerges later. And oftentimes, the same thing happens when a loved one passes away. And whether it's a shock or whatever it is, sometimes we're too numb. We don't feel. We don't want to feel maybe. Or it just, we're not ready to cry. We're not ready to mourn. And we are kind of in denial sometimes. I don't want to accept this. It's too deep of a pain to accept. I just want to live as if it never happened. And what does the Torah say? The Torah says, this is unhealthy. There's a necessity to mourn. And in fact, the first thing that we're going to do, we're going to tear our garments. And believe you me, and perhaps the funeral members here could attest to that as well. The moment that someone tears their garments, even if they haven't cried before, this is the time that their pain is being expressed. It's a tangible reality. They're walking around with a torn garment. They see it. They can't deny it. It's real. It's a good reminder, and it itself helps us express our deep pain that's going on within us. And it comes out into the open as the moment that we are tearing our garments. So that's one of the reasons why. It's a necessity. We have to mourn. Another explanation given to this idea is that it kind of tells us the idea of what are we mourning, right? Although we are sad and we're mourning the passing of the body, but we know that the soul lives on, just like the garments and the person and the body. The garments is only superficial, the garments is only external. So we're tearing the garments and say, oh, it's only garments, but the person still lives on. The person, the true reality, the true identity of the person, then the soul is eternal, lives on, and therefore we're reminding ourselves with that by tearing our garments. So there's a lot of significance to this, although it's a sad custom, because it's a custom that we do at a very sad time in our lives, but it's significant. And therefore, God willing, all our loved ones should live long, healthy lives. But at that moment, sometimes I encounter people that are not sure. We don't know. We don't want to ruin my shirt. So I'm okay. I don't have to do it. It's something that if we know the reason behind it, it's important. You don't have to wear your nicest shirts. You don't have to ruin your beautiful shirt. You could put on something that you know it's okay if I tear it. It's okay, right? Today, many funeral homes will give a black ribbon. The black ribbon is symbolic. It's a nice thing just to remember that there are those people who tear their garments. It's like instead of turning on the light, I'll give you a light bulb. It's to remember this idea. It's done, and many people do rather that, and that's why funeral homes provide it, of course. But it's something that taking this beautiful tradition with so much meaning and significance, and kind of just using it as something symbolic without actually having the real effect that it is supposed to have. Any questions before we move on?
How long do you keep the shirt on?
Oh, great question. How long do we keep the shirt on? We'll talk about it. We keep it on for the week. Keep it on for the whole Shiva. For the whole Shiva, yeah.
Change clothes. You don't change clothes the whole week.
You don't change that clothes. You can change everything else, but you can put it on top. You can wear it on top of other clothes. Yeah.
That's what I heard. I mean,
Yeah. So after after this custom of tearing the garments, we also have to know that it takes time to process the loss. We can't just, I'm done. I cried. I had the burial. I had the eulogies. Perhaps it felt good to cry. Okay, I'm moving on. I'm going back to work. I'm going back to family. I'm going back to my routine. The Torah says no. It takes time. Give yourself time. Life does not go back to normal immediately. It takes time to deal with what just happened. And that's why there's a 7-day process, a 7-day period of mourning. And then slowly there's a 30-day, a little bit of a lighter period of mourning. Then there's a 11-month, and then there's every year. It takes time. Don't rush into it. You may think you're ready. Best would be to let time heal. Don't jump the gun. So on the one hand, you have to start immediately. Start immediately. Begin mourning right away. Don't push it off. We do the burial right away. We tear our garments right away. We start the mourning right away. But at the same time, don't rush it. Give yourself time. And the Torah says, how long do you need? You need 7 days. That's how long you need. It's not 2 days. It's not 4 days. It's 7 days. Now we're going to talk about the 7-day, the Shiva, all the customs that we do. But today, I can't take off from work for 7 days. What are we going to do for 7 days? I can't host for 7 days. It's not about hosting. We don't have to host for 7 days. We could host 1 day. Or not even host at all, but 1 day, 2 days. The idea of Shiva is taking the time to process the loss. You could be home alone for a few days. You can have just a few members over. It doesn't have to be every night. People are sending over food and it's a whole balagan in my house. It's too much for me to handle. You don't have to do that for 7 days. But the Shiva process, giving yourself the time to heal, that takes time. Give yourself a complete 7 days. Now, it's not actually a complete 7 days. The truth is, halachically, it's not complete 7 days because we begin the day of burial is considered 1 day, and the last, once you have the morning of the last day, we consider it a full day. So it's usually about 5 days or 5.5 days. But give yourself that time. Give yourself that time. Don't rush into it.
What if that person was not worth it?
Not worth it.
Yeah. And what if that person was a bad person, like you said in the joke? What if the person was not a mensch?
So we have a question over here. The question is, what if the person was not a mensch? The person was a bad person. Maybe they're my mother, maybe it's my father, maybe it's my spouse, but they're not deserving of my Shiva. They're not deserving of my mourning. So that's a good question. And if the mourning was only about my feelings and what I feel at the moment, then you have a good point. But the Torah tells us that Shiva needs to happen for 2 reasons. First of all, like we mentioned last week, we're mourning the soul, the pain of the soul, the transition of the soul. So we got to be there for them. And secondly, at the end of the day, if they are our immediate relative, we still have to do that for them. Ultimately, they are our parent, they are our child, they are our sibling, and we have this intrinsic connection to them. And therefore, just for that, they are deserving of our mourning. So far, we focused mainly on the feeling the pain, not being in denial, feeling the pain of our loss focusing on our relationship that we have with the loved one. But at the same time, we can't get stuck there. We can't say, okay, I'm crying and crying and crying. I want to cry for 14 days. I want to cry for 30 days. I can't just 7 days and I'm done, right? So here is where the Torah shifts. The Torah says, okay, you did the 7 days. Now we have to start finding comfort. Now we have to start seeing how could we console ourselves? How can we lighten this up? So the Talmud tells us in text 8, and this is based on a verse from Jeremiah on page 99. The Talmud tells us, the verse says, neither cry for the dead nor bemoan him. Right? So the obvious question is what? Are we being so insensitive? We shouldn't cry for the dead? What does this mean? Of course we cry for the dead. So what does the Talmud say? Neither cry for the dead more than necessary, nor bemoan him more than what is prescribed. How are we expected to act? 3 days for weeping, 7 days for eulogies, and 30 days for restrictions on new clothing and haircuts. Once these have elapsed, God declares, you are not more compassionate than I. God is also crying. Someone has passed away, God also feels the pain. But God says, don't be more compassionate than I am. I'm telling you, this is the time. Now, obviously, it goes without saying, we're not trying to be insensitive and say, oh, just get over it. Move on. It's okay. It happens. It's life. Of course not. God forbid. God forbid. And God is compassionate. God knows that ultimately, we never truly heal. We know this. It's not only 7 days. It's not only 12 months. It's not only 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years later. We haven't healed. There's still a void in our heart. And every once in a while, it comes back. And it is, we do have difficult times, years and years later. We never truly heal. They give the analogy of someone who's on a ship, and there's a shipwreck. And at that moment, everything is just so chaotic. This person is thrown into the water. He's drowning, trying to just find something to hold on to save his life. And he grabs some type of, plank of wood or something and he's holding on for his dear life, floating in the water, and there are waves coming and splashing down on him, and he's barely making it. And this is the moment of the passing of a loved one. You don't know what's going, you don't know what's right, you don't know what's left, you don't know what's day and night. It's just, you can't even think straight. It's all a blur, right? You can't think about what's happening tomorrow. You can't make any proper arrangements. You can't think, you don't know what's going on with you. You're in the ocean and you're just trying to stay above water. And as time goes on, you kind of find yourself in that position for quite a while. You're holding on to this piece of wood and the waves are coming. But instead of the waves coming every 10 seconds, the waves are coming every 20 seconds, every minute, every 10 minutes. And instead of the waves coming and crashing down on you and almost killing you, they are a little lighter waves. They're not as heavy. They're not as dangerous. Perhaps you find others who are also floating nearby. And this is your new life. This is your new life. And eventually you learn to live this way. You learn to live floating on this log in the water. And the waves come once a year, on certain days, maybe on the birthday, maybe on the yard side, maybe when someone says something and that kind of triggers a memory or something. These are the days that these waves come crashing down, but they always come. And we try to kind of get around it, and we learn to survive. So the Torah tells us this, and the Torah knows this. This is human nature, as we said, right? So ultimately, we know we never truly heal. But what the Talmud is telling us over here, that nevertheless, we can't live life this way. We all understand, and we want this for ourselves as well. We know that we don't want to live our lives the same way we felt at the funeral of our mother, of our father, right? We know we don't want to go through life this way. We can't function this way. We can't have proper relationships. We can't raise our children. We can't be functional and productive if this is the way we're going to feel every day. Perhaps we want to feel that way certain days of the year. We want to feel we want to feel close to our loved ones at certain times of the year. That's okay. But on a day-to-day basis, we have to realize, we know this for ourselves, we do want to find comfort. And therefore, we have the Shiva, and we have things that we do during Shiva, things that we say during Shiva, to slowly try to comfort the mourners. In fact, we are told that ideally, someone who's sitting and is observing the entire 7 day of Shiva, the first 3 days of Shiva are really meant just for family and the closest friends, because that's a time where it's still very intense, and it's kind of hard to comfort them at that moment. It's really the last 3 or 4 days of Shiva where the general community is really welcome to come. Obviously, in many communities, they have different customs, and sometimes, people are not sitting all 7 days of Shiva, just sitting 1 or 2 days of Shiva. So whenever it is, obviously, whenever we're invited, that's when we go. But this is what the Talmud tells us. The first 3 days is still very intense. But here's something that we say to comfort the mourners. We got to find comfort. So what do we tell them? So in the Ashkenazi communities, there's a one-liner in Hebrew that we say. Many times you can have maybe even printed out, in the Shiva home. There's a one-liner, and you see this on text 9a. We say, Hamakom Yenachem Eschem. May the omnipresent God console you, along with the other mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. Have you heard that before? Have you ever stopped and wondered, why in the world are we bringing in Zion and Jerusalem? Who cares? Now, obviously, we care about Zion and Jerusalem, but now I'm crying over the loss of my loved one. Now you're talking to me about the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem, right? Jerusalem and Israel, we had the temple, it was destroyed, right? So we're mourning the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. Okay, I get that. But now at a Shiva home, this is what you're telling me? How does this have to do with my pain and my personal loss of my loved one? So here's two thoughts, two explanations to why we mention Zion and Jerusalem. Explanation number one. It gives, when you come to a Shiva home, when someone just passed away and you're hurting, the last thing you want to hear is some philosophical explanation to why you shouldn't feel pain. Like, these classes is not something that you should be giving in a Shiva home. Oh, giving a whole philosophical explanation that the soul is eternal, this and that. We don't want to hear that then. We want to hear it now. So for ourselves, it'll be easier if we have to process it for real one day, or for the past losses. But at the moment, we don't want to hear philosophy, right? In this one-liner, there's a subtle idea being expressed that could give comfort. We all know, what was Jerusalem? What was the temple in Jerusalem? Was it merely a house of wood and stone? It was God's abode. It was God's home. It was a place where godliness was revealed. It was a sanctuary. It was a holy place, a godly place, a place that you're able to touch the divine. Now, it was destroyed. But we all know that what was destroyed? Was God destroyed? Of course not. Doesn't make any sense. Can't destroy God. It's the building that was destroyed. But the energy, the divine energy, the soul of the building, of course, lives on. And that's the message that we're telling the mourners. God should come comfort you among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. It's the same thing. The mourners of Zion and Jerusalem, they're mourning the destruction of the physical building, but we know that the spiritual building, the soul of the building lives on, of course. There's no question about that. So too, the loss of a loved one, it's the physical loss, but the spiritual obviously lives on. The soul lives on. So that's one idea. But then there's another idea. And this other idea, and these actually both of these ideas, is found in the letter. The letter is we have text. Text 9b, and we also have in the appendix also another text. It's a letter that the Rebbe wrote to Arik Sharon. I think it was in the 1960s or 1970s, that his son died by an accident with playing. He was playing with a rifle in his yard, and accidentally he shot himself and he died. And you can only imagine that Arik Sharon, the warrior, the general in the IDF, finds that his son died suddenly at a young age, a teenager. He was heartbroken. And the Rebbe sent him a letter. And this is one of the ideas that the Rebbe wrote into a letter to try to get to comfort him. So the second idea that is written in that letter is that the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem, who was mourning the destruction of the temple? Was it one family? Was it one community? Was it only the people in Israel? Or was it all Jewish people, every man, woman, and child of the Jewish nation, wherever they found themselves, whether it was in Israel, whether it was in the diaspora, they were mourning, they were saddened, they were pained by the destruction of the temple. So too, we are telling the mourner, God should comfort you together with the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem, because when we lose someone in the community, when one individual loses a parent, loses a child, loses a spouse, a sibling, it's not only your individual, your personal loss, it's the loss of the entire community. We are all with you. Your pain is our pain. And that is the subtle idea that we are expressing in these words. God should comfort you among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. Because just like there, it was the entire community, entire Jewish people who were suffering, who were pained, who were mourning. So too over here, we are also together with the entire community mourning, and we share your pain together with you. So that is a little bit about the importance of being comforted, not to be stuck in the grief, in the pain, but allow yourself to find comfort. Slowly, gradually, not in one day. Like we said, don't rush, but slowly to open yourself, to allow yourself to be consoled. But there's a problem for many. Let's be honest. For some of us, it's difficult. For some of us, we do get stuck. We get stuck in grief. We can't get out of it. Now, before we move on, it's important to note that sometimes a person is truly stuck in grief, and perhaps they get depressed, and they do have to seek professional help. And although I'm a rabbi, I'm not a professional social worker or psychologist or anything like that. So obviously, if professional help is needed, professional help should be sought. But let me just give you some ideas what the Torah has to say, and perhaps it could help. If someone is stuck in grief, why? Why would someone be stuck in grief? Let me give you one example. Someone is dealing with anger of injustice. Why did this have to happen? God, why does God always take the best of us? Why him? Why her? Such a young age, a young child. It's not right. Perhaps someone was negligent and caused the death of another. Isn't it right? Did this person die prematurely? We're angry. We feel this is wrong. So it's hard to move on. We feel the pain, not because someone passed away. We lack this relationship, this physical relationship. But we're angry on this passing. Why did this have to happen? Right? Maybe we're angry at God. And it's hard to move on. So what does the Torah have to say about this? So let me tell you a story. This is a story with one of the greatest sages in Jewish history. And his name was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Yochanan, the son of Zakkai. And he was there, he lived through the destruction of the temple. He saw millions of Jews massacred and exiled. He's seen it all. He went through the Holocaust. He's seen it all. And then what happens? Yochanan ben Zakkai's own child, a young child, passes away, dies at a young age. And suddenly, Yochanan ben Zakkai loses it. He can't find peace. He can't find consolement. He can't be comforted. He's crying and he's crying uncontrollably. So his disciples, his students, try to comfort him. And they come into his chamber, they come into his room and they say, "Can we talk to you?" And each and every one of them try to console him. They say, "Listen, Adam also lost a son, Cain, but he consoled himself. Abraham lost Sarah." And go on and on. Job lost children all in one day, right? And he was consoled, right? It happened to so many and it worked for them. It should work for you. And Yochanan ben Zakkai says this is nonsense. Just because they were able to do it doesn't mean I am able to do it. On the contrary, you're making me more sad. Find out that even more people lost their loved ones. It's not helping me. Until one student, Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch, he comes and he says, "I want to tell you something." And what does he tell him? He tells them, "Listen, I'll share with you a parable. Your situation is similar to that of an individual to whom the king entrusted an article for safekeeping. Each day, the man would weep and wail in fear. Woe it is to me, when will I emerge unharmed from this safekeeping role?" He says, your child was a deposit. God gave you a deposit. You treated him nicely. He was productive. He was a good human being, a God-fearing Jew. The time came for you to return the deposit. Let's not take life for granted. Life is a gift. It's a deposit. It's a deposit from God. Every day is precious. Every day is valuable. Every day that we are able to be with our loved ones is a treasured gift. And we have to feel grateful for that gift, not entitled for that gift. We can't compare lifespans. Oh, this person lived longer and this person lived shorter. Why is that? Imagine if the average lifespan was 200 years. Ooh, this person only lived to 100 years old. He lived only half his life. Right? We would be sad. Let's not compare. Each individual has their life and what they lived. And we have to be grateful for every moment that we had with them. It's just a little bit of a different perspective that the Torah gives us. Is it easy? Not at all. But here's some perspective. And I want to kind of paraphrase this idea in a video. Some of you who've been to previous JLI courses may have seen this video. And the reason why I'm using it again, even though it was not produced for this course, is because it was a very, very powerful video. So I thought, you know what? I will share it again because it fits right into this idea of every moment that we live with our loved ones should be treasured and is precious.
Years ago, I was invited to speak in Argentina. The flight was from Minnesota to New York to Miami to Chile, Buenos Aires. I don't fly well. I hate it. It's uncomfortable. I suffer through it. And this was a particularly difficult, long, verschleppte Krenk. When I finally arrive in Buenos Aires, the shliach there picks me up at the airport, takes me to a hotel room so that I can recover, and the next day we start the lecture tour. Picks me up, we're in the car, we're driving along, and he says, by the way, there's a woman in town who suffered a terrible tragedy. She is severely depressed. She hasn't come out of her apartment in 6 months, and she refuses to talk to anybody. But when we told her you were coming, she agreed to talk to you. So we'll stop at her apartment on the way to the hotel, and you'll talk to her. I was furious. I couldn't believe it. It has to be on the way to the hotel? But what bothered me the most, see, you didn't even tell me. You didn't ask me, you didn't warn me, you didn't tell me. What is this? Come into the apartment, and this woman literally looks like she has passed away and nobody told her. There was no life in her eyes. There was no tone in her voice. There was no color in her skin. I mean, she hadn't left the apartment in 6 months. She looked terrible. She tells me the story, 19-year-old son, driving back from their country home, gets into a car accident, and then she tells me what a fantastic kid he was. What an exceptional, respectful, helpful, all the great qualities. She finishes, what can you say? So I said, that sounds like a fantastic kid you had. And you had him for 19 years. She was not impressed. So I said, imagine if there was no shock. Imagine God comes to you and says, there is this fantastic soul in heaven. He needs to be born and live for 19 years. I'm looking for someone to be his mother. I said, what would you have said if God had asked you? I was sure she would say yes. Most people would. She said, absolutely not. Without thinking, I said, well, it's a good thing he didn't ask you. The floodgates opened up. She cried like she needed to cry for the last 6 months. And in front of my eyes, she came back to life. Literally the resurrection. She came back to life in 20 minutes in front of my eyes. It was the most incredible, the most emotional. There were no words. Now we're back in the car, going to the hotel room. And I'm thinking, I was so angry because they didn't ask me. And then I thought, if they had asked me, what would I have said? I would have said, absolutely not. And it would have been the wrong answer, because I would not give up that experience for anything. I would say that in 50 some years of talking to people, that has got to be way up there as the most significant, most amazing. To say no to that, got to be crazy. And I would have been crazy. And I would have said no. The moral of the story is that it's a good thing that God doesn't ask us. You want a challenge in your life? Not particularly, no. Want an uphill struggle? Absolutely not. Want to get married? Not if I don't have to. What would we amount to if we got to choose? So it's really a good thing. God doesn't ask. He has more confidence in us than we have.
That's all manas. Yep. So that's the same idea. I guess it was based. This story, this message is based actually on text. The long text. I didn't read it inside. It's text 11, I believe, where it has a long story of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and the answer that he received from one of the rabbis about his son passing away at a young age. And I think this is something for some of us, if we're kind of stuck in grief. We have anger, we have this injustice. What's going on? Why did this have to happen? Something to keep in mind. Something to keep in mind that we have to value the time that we did have together. We're not questioning God at this point. We're not trying to understand God's ways. We're just saying every moment in life is precious. We're not entitled to it. It's a gift from God. And the fact that we had 10 years together, 20 years together, 50, 60 years together, even though it's not what we planned. We always thought we'll live to an old ripe age together, whatever it is. It's all from God. It's life is a deposit. So that is one idea that we could perhaps entertain when we're going through some of these hard times. Another area where perhaps it could cause a person to be stuck in grief is the feeling of guilt. I really wanted to make amends before the person passed away. Or why did I say that? Or I could have done more. There's so many different types of guilt that a person may have. But now it's over. It's too late now. I can never ask forgiveness now. And therefore, it's hard to move out of that stage of grief because we feel like there's no way out. There's no solution. We lost the opportunity. We missed the train, as they say. So again, the Torah has something to say about this as well. And the Torah tells us that it's not too late. We could still communicate with our loved ones. We could ask forgiveness. And they do hear our talk, our requests, our prayers. So it's never too late. So if we truly believe in that, it perhaps will minimize at least the sense of guilt that perhaps we are feeling towards them. So let's kind of get back into what we were talking earlier about the process where after the first stages of intense grief, we come to the stages of Shiva, which is supposed to slowly let the time heal and also let others comfort us and let us open ourselves to being comforted. So let's talk a little bit more about this Shiva. So there's once a show being played. There's a play, a Broadway show where tickets were sold out, and especially for the front row seats. It was impossible to get a front row seat. So someone buys the second row seats, and they're sitting in second row, and right in front of them, you see there's an empty seat right next to a woman. So he taps the woman on the shoulder and says, "Hey, excuse me, ma'am, I see there's an empty seat. I know that the front seats were sold out. Did you buy it for someone? Do you know who's supposed to be here? Are they coming late?" And she says, "Yeah, I'm sorry. It was for my late husband. Passed away recently." And he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry for being insensitive. I didn't realize that. I'm so sorry. But it's such a great seat. Like, do you not have any like family or close friends that maybe you could have brought with you to sit in this seat?" And she says, No. They're all at the Shiva. So let's talk about Shiva for a moment, right? We mentioned a little bit about the Shiva, but I want to look at page 110, some of the basic Shiva protocol. Now, there's a lot to discuss about the Shiva. We'll kind of go through some of the ideas, some of the customs, and we'll try to talk about what to do and what not to do at a Shiva visit. So you see on page 110. So first of all, there's this custom that the mirrors and pictures in the Shiva house are to remain covered. We are referring to pictures of faces, portraits of people. These pictures and mirrors should be covered. Why? Great question. It's like a Kabbalistic reason for it. I'm not sure myself exactly what the reason, but this is the custom. The custom is
all people or just the deceased?
All people. Any portrait in the house that people are sitting in the main rooms, either we remove or we cover them. Cover them with a sheet, cover them with the paper or whatever it is, or we take them down. Mirrors as well. We cover all the mirrors. It's a custom that's brought down in Kabbalah. I'll leave it at that.
Is that so you cannot see the person that passed away, or?
It's a pretty spooky reason in Kabbalah. I'm not getting into it.
That's what I heard, so I don't know.
For the duration of Shiva, the mourners observe the following conditions. Okay? First of all, remain in the house of mourning. Again, this is like the ideal Shiva. If you want to fully observe the Shiva with all the traditions, this is the way it's done. If you're not able to do all of it, we do part of it, but this is just what the Torah tells us. This is the optimal way of observing Shiva. Remain in the house of mourning. Remain home for 7 days. Don't leave. Have someone else do the errands for you. You are here. You're not busying yourself with anything else other than mourning itself. Ideally, the house of mourning should be the house of the deceased. Now, it's not always practical. Sometimes they're out of town. Sometimes they lived in a nursing home or they live in a small little apartment. Not always possible. But if it is possible, if all equal, better to be in the home of the deceased. If you remember, maybe lesson 1, I believe we spoke about the soul kind of goes from the home to the grave, from the home to the grave. That is ideally, primarily referring to the home of the deceased themselves. So there's value to doing Shiva in the home of the deceased. If that's not possible, it's the home of the mourners themselves. Continue wearing the garment that was torn as an act of mourning for the entire 7-day duration. Sit on low chair or stool. We don't sit on the couch. We don't sit on a regular chair. We sit on lower chairs or on stools. Again, it's an expression of pain, an expression of mourning. Forgo the comfort of leather footwear. Shun shaving and haircuts. Refrain from marital intimacy. Avoid listening to music. Abstain from work or business. And even avoid studying Torah. You know why? Because when you study Torah, it brings joy. We all know that, right? So it's not only the jokes of the Torah, but the Torah itself, when we're studying Torah, it's supposed to bring joy. It's joyous. It's intellectual, we're connecting to God, etc., etc. So it brings joy. So we refrain from studying Torah during the Shiva. Obviously, those who are visiting are able to study Torah. We're talking about the mourners themselves don't study Torah for the duration of Shiva. There are restrictions of bathing and showering and wearing freshly laundered clothing. It's something that is a little nuanced. So if
That's another story.
Not a story, it's just there's halachic a lot of conditions over here, so it's very generalized over here. A minyan prayer quorum gathers in the house of the mourning for the daily prayers. During the prayer services, the mourners recite the Kaddish. We will speak in greater detail about the Kaddish next week, the significance of the Kaddish, etc. But this is something that's said already in the Shiva home. If we're able to gather a minyan in the Shiva home itself, that is optimal, that is ideal. Many times, many communities, it's not possible, or maybe some homes are not big enough, or whatever it is. So then the mourner would come to the synagogue to say the Kaddish and do the prayers at the synagogue. However, again, optimal Shiva observance would be to do the prayers in the home of the Shiva. And finally, which is probably most famous for Shiva is for that relatives and friends and community members visit the mourners at the Shiva house to fulfill the mitzvah of consoling the mourners and to participate in prayer, Torah study, and giving charity in the merit of the departed. So this is actually a biblical commandment to go comfort the mourners. It's it falls under the category of love your fellow as yourself. If you love them, you're going to try to comfort them. Try to console them. And the problem that many of us have is we don't feel comfortable at a Shiva home. What should I say? I might say the wrong thing. I might mean to comfort them, meaning I'm hurting them. It's even more hurtful than beneficial. So I don't feel, I'm not so close with them. Maybe they don't want me to come, right? We have all these questions. We're uncomfortable. Many of us are uncomfortable. And that's true. We are uncomfortable. But for those who have sat through a Shiva, I think we all know, and tell me if I'm wrong, that just the mere fact that people are coming, that itself is what brings us the most comfort. Better say something, maybe mistakenly, it might be hurtful, than not show up at all. Because more often than not, just by being there, you're bringing comfort. And I actually want to just open up for just 2 minutes, if someone wants to share with us some of the things that they heard, if they were sitting Shiva, or if they heard of someone sitting Shiva and heard something that really was beneficial and really helped them during Shiva. If you want to share with us briefly. Or something that was hurtful, something that we shouldn't say during Shiva. Yes, Jill.
So, I guess when I was sitting Shiva, I liked when someone said, well, tell me about your father, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is so great. I was able to talk about it.
Okay, that's a great springboard. So what Jill said is, someone asked her, tell me about your father. Sing Shiva over your father passed away, tell me about him. And that is exactly what we are supposed to do at a Shiva home. Exactly what we're supposed to do at a Shiva home. We are not supposed to try to explain things. We're not try to be philosophical or minimize the pain. That's not what we're here for. We're here for them and ask them. Tell me about the deceased. Tell me about your loved one. Tell me about your father. Tell me about your mother. You can't go wrong. If they're not interested in sharing, they won't share. But more often than not, they're glad to share. And guess what? Who enjoys that? Not only the mourner, but the deceased as well gains from this. Look at text 16, what the Midrash says, the second half. When a person departs the world, God says to the ministering angels, see what people are saying about him. If they are saying that he has been upright and God-fearing, his soul immediately ascends to paradise. Talking about the deceased, their life, how they impacted us for the good, reminiscing of the good times that we had together. This is something that is beneficial for the mourners, and it's also beneficial for the soul of the deceased. Yes?
So I will say that so I've taken this class before, so I kind of learned what you're supposed to say, what's important, like what you're not supposed to say.
Yeah.
And because before I took the class, there were times when I said things I shouldn't have said, like, oh, your mother's in a better place, or, oh, just those kind of things that.
Right.
And the person kind of looked at me like, no, she's not in a better place.
Right. So an example of something that often is being said, and you see this, just on social media when someone passes away, oh, your mother's in a better place. Now, in Judaism, even, is that true? Before we get to, is that helpful? Is that comforting? But is it true? So we know, we mentioned this many times, that better place, it's a different place. Ultimately, the soul, it wants to be down here, and it's more impactful down here, and it's able to be have a little more of a meaningful life down here. Yes, the soul lives on, and the soul is going through this painful transition over a few months, or over 11, 12 months, until it reaches its final destination. But we're not here to explain things, to minimize the pain. The best thing is, like we said, to ask them, tell me about the person. But even if you don't want to do that, the most important thing is just be there and be silent. You don't have to say anything. The Talmud tells us in text 14, the reward for visiting the home of mourning is for the silence. I was a child, and my father tells me he's going to a Shiva home. It was the home of a friend of mine, a classmate of mine. His grandfather passed away. So my father was going to his father, my friend's father, to pay a Shiva visit. So I said, okay, I'll come along, My classmate's grandfather, I'll come along. This might have been the first time I was actually at a Shiva home. I was a young child. And there were a few people there. And the son, the mourner, was sitting on a low chair, and there was maybe one person sitting next to him. And then my father sat down, like there's one person in between my father and this mourner, and I sat next to my father. We sat there for about 15 minutes. My father didn't utter a word. The mourner was kind of, talking a little bit with some other people around. I remember sitting there 15 minutes. My friend, my classmate, wasn't even home. We sat there for 15 minutes in silence. And then my father stood up. He said, the Hamakom Yenachem, he said that passage, and he left. I was kind of wondering, why did we come? We didn't say anything. We just sat there 15 minutes, easily, maybe even more. We sat there, we didn't say a word, and we left. But that's the beauty of a Shiva call. You come to a Shiva home, you don't have to say anything. The fact that this person walked in, person got dressed, made it their business to put it on their schedule, to come there, to drive there, to take the time to be there for you, that itself shows, I'm here. I'm here for you. I care about you. I don't know what to say. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I'm nervous. But I'm here. I'm here, and I'm here for you. And that's all we need. That's all we need. Maybe later in life, we can start thinking about it, explanations and understanding what happened. But at this moment, the moment of pain, the moment of mourning, all we want to see is people are here for us. Like we mentioned earlier, the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem, the whole community is here together. Your pain is our pain. So we're here, we're sitting next to you. That's all it takes, that's all it is. And it's okay to express your pain. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to cry at a Shiva home. Sometimes we feel like, we got to lighten up the mood over here. It's too depressing. It's the talking in there, the crying in there. Wait, it's a Shiva home. You didn't come to a entertainment, comedy, club. This is a Shiva home. This is what it's meant for. Now is the time to cry. This is the time to express your feelings of pain after the passing of a loved one. Yes, maybe later on you want to lighten them, but this is a Shiva home. You don't have to put on lively music and start dancing. That's not what it's meant to be. You don't have to crack a joke. It's okay. This is healthy. This is a healthy way of mourning. Because if you don't do it now, they may never do it. Or they may do it in 5 years. And then suddenly it comes crashing down like a boulder on your head. All the pain is coming out. Now is the time to get it out. Now is the time to do it. So the Shiva home doesn't have to be light. It could be heavy. And we don't have to engage in the conversation. We could just be there and listen. We could just be there and be silent. That itself is the power of the comfort that we could give just by being there, even our silence. So that is about Shiva. So just to recap what we have discussed today, we spoke a little bit about the reasons behind why we mourn. We spoke about human nature. We spoke about that it's healing. We understand how an important part, phase in life has ended. We spoke about how it's done. How we start immediately. We don't push this off. We start with tearing our garments, expressing a real, tangible expression of our pain. And we start this immediately. We don't push this off. But at the same time, it doesn't end right away. Give it time. Give it at least 7 days of the intense level. Give it 30 days. Give it 12 months, right? In stages. Don't jump out of it too early. If you rush it, you're going to regret it. It's not it takes time to heal. And that's why we have the 7-day, we have the 30-day, we have the 12-month period. We spoke a little bit of the idea of not getting stuck in grief, thinking about the idea that every moment, every day alive is something that's a gift from God, it's a deposit. So maybe we had other plans, we thought it would be longer, but there's no reason to be angry at God, to feel that injustice, because ultimately God is not asking us, God is giving us a gift, and we should treasure it for the time that we have it. We spoke about the guilt, that it's not too late, we can still communicate and ask for forgiveness, etc., even after we pass away, after someone passes away. And then we spoke about what to do and what not to do in a Shiva home, some of the customs that we do in a Shiva home, and what not to say and what we should say. Silence itself is what's most important, and also speak about the deceased, speak about the loved one, and that is the best way to have a conversation and a visit in a Shiva home. So that is tonight's discussion. Next week, we're going to go back to discussing the soul. We're going to go back to discussing what happens after the first period of transition. Hell, heaven, talking about the Kaddish effect on the soul. That will be next week, God willing, same place, same time, same Zoom. Look out for an email from us. Always a recap and a recording of the class. If you have any questions, either now or throughout the week, please always reach out to me. I'm always happy to answer questions. 2 announcements. First of all, Purim is coming up this week. Thursday night is the night of Purim, and Friday day. I extend a personal invitation to all of you to join us for a Megillah reading. We're doing it indoors and outdoors simultaneously Thursday evening at 6:30 p.m. So you can hear the Megillah, celebrate together, and we'll have a break the fast outdoor in our tent. I'm hoping for good weather so we could join together for a break the fast, as well as Purim during the day. We also have Megillah readings throughout the day, throughout the city. So please join for us one of the Megillah readings and our Purim party Friday evening, etc. You're all invited to join. If you don't have the information, you can reach out for the information. Also, Thursday, March 4th, we are having Doron Kornbluth, who is a world-renowned speaker on the topic of cremation versus burial from a Jewish perspective. Somewhat, a little bit what we've spoken about in the last lesson. I highly recommend you join. It's going to be it's a Zoom meeting with him at 6:30 on Thursday, March 4th. An email should be going out. If it did not go out today, it should be going out tomorrow. So look out for it. There's no charge. Just sign up and you'll get that Zoom information. And we'd love for you to join that. So that's the end of tonight's discussion. If you have any questions, you can unmute yourself or chat, or I'm always happy to continue the conversation. Thank you all for joining us.